thank you. Great to be here and honored to be able to talk about Fast Forward, the National MS Society's commercial research program. And so I'll just basically talk about the introduction, what we are, and how we work, our process for finding and vetting opportunities, what our current portfolio looks like, and the metrics that we use to evaluate that and the outcomes we've achieved so far, and then talk a bit about challenges and opportunities that we face in the space. So the National MS Society is a driving force in MS research, and the Society's invested over $800 million in research since its inception in 1947, and really a lot of that research has contributed to most of the FDA-approved therapies that we have today. And in 2015, the Society invested $54.5 million in new or ongoing research projects. This is about half of what NIH does for all of MS research. So NIH does about $100 million, Society does another $50. And we fund the most promising research, regardless of where it is, and also have a mandate to attract and train promising young investigators. And so the research focus area that we are on in terms of priorities have to do with stopping progression of disease. That's our area of unmet need. And so clearly that's a key aspect of a lot of our R&D efforts. Importantly, we also look at restoring what's been lost. So in addition to typical research looking at new drug development opportunities and therapies there are also symptoms management projects and rehabilitative medicine projects that fit into this aspect of restoring what's been lost in MS. And of course, we never want to lose sight of ending MS forever. And so looking at all of the research that's involved in triggers of MS, gene-environment interactions, what types of things are causing and starting, initiating MS, and what might we do to stop that. And so what is Fast Forward? So it's the Society's commercial research program. It's a nonprofit subsidiary of the MS Society, wholly owned by the MS Society, completely under the Society's umbrella, and funded by philanthropic contributions and a collaborative strategic partnership. And so we work basically to fill that funding gap between discovery research and early preclinical studies, early clinical evaluation, where we can hopefully de-risk these projects and increase the value of them to make them better candidates for subsequent partnering or financing events to get them further down the road. And of course, within all of that, we're working to increase the number of investigators and companies that are working in the MS R&D space. And so we have two portfolios, basically two investment portfolios. We've funded a little over $17 million to date. Fast Forward was technically started in 2007, and we've had 38 projects that we've managed. And from what we call the general fund, which is based on philanthropic donations, and that's where the funding comes from, 130 proposals were formally reviewed, and 20 companies and 5 academic institutions have been funded, and $12.2 million have been deployed in that setting. And we have 10 active programs, about 10 active programs ongoing now. In the collaborative fund, this was a partnership with EMD Serono, and in that case, the RFPs were pretty much driven by EMD Serono and their research area mandate. And in that fund, that investment activity, there were 190 proposals reviewed, and 8 companies and 5 academic institutions were funded there for $5.2 million. And so the usual mechanism that we fund is a 1 to 2 year project, averaging $500,000 per project, but basically in the range of $200K to $1 million. And we certainly have 1 cycle a year. Sometimes we have 2. We don't take proposals on an ongoing rolling basis, but we are continuously evaluating opportunities. So we want to be able to be opportunistic and pick up good ones when they appear. So we do ad hoc reviews at any time during the year. And so the process that we use is a little bit different from a typical research grant. So we do obviously evaluate the scientific merit, and that is a key component and relevancy to MS, obviously. But we also do bring in business advisors with experience in pharma industry, whatever is the relevant industry to the proposal and review. And we really do look at the business prospect. We treat it like an investment. We want to invest in companies that are going to be on strong footing to have the ability to go forward with this technology. So as I said, a typical peer review process, but additional review on the business side, and that includes an evaluation of the intellectual property around the technology. And of course, the criteria are alignment to the RFP and the scientific merit. Those are right up top. But in addition to, say, the intellectual property and the commercial space that we're looking at, it's important to consider the team, the advisors, the collaborators, the environment. That's especially important. As we know, if the VCs are looking at them the same way, any company that would be doing a licensing deal would be evaluating the same components. So we want to bring that aspect of rigor into the evaluation of these projects. And as I said, the viability of the business is a big important aspect of the review, and to that extent we want to know that the IP is protected and the budgets and timelines are appropriate for the work plans, and that it's presenting some kind of strong competitive position with a likelihood of going forward. Just a second on the graphical representation of that process. You can see that it's an ongoing process of evaluating companies, but when we get to the point on the left where we have an open RFP and we take full proposals in, one of the things that's different from a typical research evaluation process is we have a pitch session between the review committee that we've assembled to evaluate these companies and the companies themselves. And the rationale is that we need the companies to communicate to the panel what they're trying to do in order to get a good review. And the converse is true. If there are comments, suggestions about the approach, we want to take advantage of the business advisors that we have on the call to help the company improve themselves. Because at the end of the day, if they don't get funded in that round, but they get funded in a subsequent round, we've helped make them better, and we've added one more into the queue for another opportunity for some aspect in the fight against MS. So it's a very interactive process where our mission is to move them forward in any way we can. Once we conduct our review, the reviews are presented to the Fast Forward Board of Managers, in which case they give us the okay to negotiate the terms of the sponsored research agreement. And we do look for a financial return, very typical venture philanthropy model. So we do look for a return, extremely reasonable conditions for return, because we need to be an enabling organization. We need to be helping these companies get forward. We can't be putting up roadblocks for them for their progress. So the mindset is very much, when you're successful, we would like to benefit as well in that success. So once they're approved by the board, then they're ready for kickoff and starting. So I want to look for a second at the National MS Society's overall research portfolio so you can see where Fast Forward fits in. And as you might imagine, the bulk of the research that the Society funds are typical research grants to academic institutions and nonprofits. And so this is the current multi-year commitments that the Society has going forward. So obviously many research grants, but also healthcare delivery and policy research contracts. The International MS Progressive Alliance is a big effort from the Society's perspective now. MS Centers, pilot awards, fellowships and training programs are all important components in this. And Fast Forward, the commercial funding is actually quite a small piece. And I know if it were up to me, I'd like to see that number be 10 or 20% of the overall budget. So what we're trying to do, one of the things we'll talk about later is what we're trying to do to enhance our capacity in that regard. And so to look at the portfolio in terms of the Fast Forward work, it's important to know that, like I said, we're completely part of the Society, so we're completely aligned with the Stop, Restore, and End research priorities. And we fund at multiple stages of the drug discovery and development process. And we're agnostic to approach, be it small molecule or biologics. We fund primarily companies, but we do fund projects within the academic setting, provided that they're working with CROs and other companies with a lot of integrity and credibility, because that's what we're going for here, is for commercial research at that level. And we fund everywhere. And so the Fast Forward portfolio, in terms of the disease aspects that we're getting at in MS, is shown here. And so nerve repair and neuroprotection are becoming our big slices of the pie, because we know that in MS, there are something like 12 or 13 approved drugs for relapsing remitting MS. Our challenge is fighting progressive disease, and there is essentially nothing effective in that space. So a lot of our research is oriented towards that aspect of neurodegeneration. And so the immunomodulation component kind of historically has been shrinking, and I think that'll continue to be the trend. Also, we would like to see more symptoms management opportunities because to some extent we know there's a great need for symptoms management. There isn't a lot out there to address that, and there are some benefits in that the clinical trials in the symptoms management space can be less expensive and shorter trials, so the likelihood of getting them down the road is increased in that case. And you can see also about 10% of what we do is in the diagnostic space. And this is just pointing out that we fund across the early preclinical stage of development, lead candidate optimization. As you might imagine, we get a lot of proposals from companies outside of the MS field looking to see if their compound has any utility in our animal models, so proof of concept is common for us to see. We do fund a considerable amount of traditional PK, tox, and safety studies. We're glad to have companies at that stage because they're getting close to clinic, obviously. And in some cases, we have been able to participate in early aspects of clinical supply and clinical study. But by and large, that's where our sweet spot is. And obviously, attendant with that, these are the types of R&D activities that we typically fund. As I mentioned, PK, tox, ADME, typical. Important to note that we do flat out pay for intellectual property development. And I want to point out that when we look at our venture philanthropy model and our financial return that we look for, it's important to note that we do not look to own any IP. We want the companies to be unencumbered in that process. So I think that's been a good aspect of the model from the society's perspective. I believe there was only one company that refused funding because of the terms, and that was more related to them being in an ongoing discussion and relationship with another pharma partner, and they chose not to take the fast-forward funding because the pharma partner was preferable at the time. So also because we are looking to increase the number of companies that are in the MS space, we find it's often necessary to fund key opinion leader meetings to properly orient them. MS is a challenging clinical development pathway, and it's common for companies to come in to think that it's simple, straightforward, and easy. So there's an educational component and a nurturing component that we provide for these companies, and that's been a very useful aspect of what we do. This is just meant to point out that we see most of our work in this preclinical proof of concept, optimization, and discovery phase. That's really what we do a lot of. And obviously a little bit more towards the IND phase, the preclinical development takes up the bigger part of the pie. So that's our sweet spot. And that's just this next graph just shows that most of what we see are small molecule opportunities. And we do have some biologics in play, and it might be that it's just a less expensive pathway to do some of this type of research in the small molecule space as opposed to biologics. I don't know if there's any connection between our portfolio and that aspect of development. That's just an observation. We have recently looked at our companies to see how they're doing, and we know that 61% of the previously funded programs funded through Fast Forward are still active in some capacity in their respective companies or in their acquisition partners. And of those, 29% are in clinical development. These are most of them are actually in MS, and so as opposed to being acquired for a different indication. And 24% are still progressing preclinically, and some are coming back to Fast Forward for the next steps in development. And we do that in appropriate cases. We have some really exemplary companies that behave really well and are extremely efficient, and we want to promote more of that. So we do what we can within our capacity to promote that type of follow-on funding. A full 47% are what you would call on hold while they're searching for a partner. And of course, this is not uncommon. We know that partnering in MS is difficult and challenging. It's a very competitive therapeutic space because of all the existing drugs in relapsing remitting MS, and challenging clinical development pathway because of the uncertainty of regulatory approval in progressive MS and the challenges associated with that aspect of the indication. And so nearly half of the companies that have come in have had other applications to their technology that they're looking for partnerships for, specifically for the MS aspect of it. And I'll mention it here. I don't know whether or not I have it in the slide deck, but we do openly collaborate and co-fund with other foundations, other organizations where compounds do have cross-indication potential. And I think that's a really good way to increase many groups' capacity to de-risk. I'd like to see us do more of that. One aspect of our work that's important is that we do want to improve the ability of our academic investigators to translate their findings into commercial potential. And so we are beginning to take more of an active role in that process and finding ways to promote them, and working more with industry. And so, as I mentioned, since the Society's budget is a full 50% of what the NIH spends on MS research, there's considerable depth and deep knowledge in that space. And so we know that there's more opportunities there. And we know already that many society investigators are already playing a role in fast-forward funded projects. So the bridge building and connection making aspect of what we do is really important. And a full 63% of our portfolio projects include academic collaborators or PIs that were funded by the society. So we're looking to improve that aspect of it too. And as you might be aware, there are many academic technology transfer offices and centers that are building some considerable academic drug discovery capability. And so there's more sophistication in certain universities, and we're looking to increase our activity in that space. And we know that, as I mentioned, 26% of fast-forward projects either were or are based at university research labs. So the metrics that we look at are basic things like INDs or clinical trials being started, whether or not the company has established a partnership or licensing opportunity, or if they've received follow-on financing. So those are our big top three primary outcome measures. The other measures are important as well. We don't really ascribe any weight to these. There's no formula for how we evaluate outcome, but these are the types of aspects of the program that we want to promote and see. So a deeper understanding of the MS space, a better understanding of MS biology to help us get better targets for therapeutics. And so what we've had so far, a couple of standouts are on this slide. So these are companies that have received some follow-on financing from us, and Canvex is a really good example of a company that came to Fast Forward at a very early stage with a request for some funding for intellectual property development. And so we know that the funding from the foundation provides more value than the dollars itself. It's a seal of approval, the evaluation of the project, and adds a lot of value. And that enabled Canvex to raise $3.2 million from Merck Serono Ventures and $2.8 from the Wellcome Trust. And I think it was last year that they mentioned a deal with Ipsen financing to basically pay for their phase 2A study with an acquisition buyout at the end. So this is a company that's had, primarily foundation investment, low level of venture capital funding, and it's gotten into phase 2 with an extremely promising drug candidate for spasticity in MS. Similarly, Concert Pharmaceuticals, Innate Immunotherapeutics, and Diogenics have all had financings. Concert did a $93 million IPO. Obviously, only a percentage of that was based on the work that was to be developed for the MS indication. They have other indications as well. But clearly, the funding from the Society and Fast Forward and the promise of doing that work was a component of the roadshow, for certain of that. And there have been some other smaller financings, but in the case of Innate and Diogenics, they were specifically directed towards the financing and development of the MS work. And so Innate is actually in a secondary progressive MS clinical trial now with the funds that they've raised. And Diogenics was acquired by Amaranthus Biosciences as a diagnostic test looking at earlier detection of MS. So there have been some subsequent financings that have taken place, and a couple of licenses and acquisitions. So Apitope is another company that was funded through Fast Forward, and Merck Serono made a commitment to them, and they're currently in their phase 2A study. This is a myelin-basic protein peptide tolerance approach that's in the clinic now. And Amplimmune did a project with Fast Forward on AMP110, and so that led to a Daiichi Sankyo deal, and ultimately it turned out that this molecule was a checkpoint inhibitor, so it got snapped up by AstraZeneca to play in the immuno-oncology space. So what we like to say is that the $17.5 million in seed financing have enabled approximately $37 million in follow-on financing for some of the companies in our portfolio, and the potential biodollar value of all of those deals comes in at around $855 million should every checkbox get checked. So that's for the way we operate. Not having financial return as the mandate, but improving the opportunities for drug and diagnostic development for people living with MS, I think that's pretty good. So what are our challenges? There are plenty of them. In a recent report on the global forecast in MS through 2024, we know that there is still unmet need even in the relapsing remitting space. None of the therapies available are perfect, and there aren't any good biomarkers to identify or stratify the patient population to know who's going to respond to which therapy. Great need for that. I've already touched on the importance of understanding the pathophysiology of progressive MS, and we know that is the biggest area. There have been some great successes recently with an anti-CD20, a B-cell antibody, ocrelizumab, both in relapsing remitting MS and in progressive MS, that show some promise for some new therapeutic approaches there. So what we anticipate is going to happen is the progressive MS market opportunities are going to hopefully become more attractive because of some success there. And so based on this report, the MS therapeutics market is increasingly crowded, but overall fulfillment is low to medium. So there still remains a lot of opportunity there. And from our perspective at Fast Forward in the society, our challenge is opportunity overload. There's so much promising R&D out there waiting to happen, and we can't possibly do it all. So it's difficult to decide which projects take the lead. And most of these opportunities need some active nurturing component to it, whether it's KOLs or just educational component. One of the challenges we face relates to project diversity. We are primarily set up to evaluate drug development opportunities, to a lesser extent diagnostics, but more and more tools are coming our way, digital devices, iPad devices, software, rehabilitative medicine approaches, which are not in our wheelhouse as far as typical drug development. So we face some challenges there in getting a proper review of those opportunities. And of course, all expect us to be the driver of making this happen. So it's great to have the opportunity, but it can present a challenge as well. And so how can we hopefully overcome some of those challenges? Well, as I mentioned, we're looking at promoting and facilitating more industry interaction with our academic investigators. They're funded anyway. Let's use that opportunity to help get some commercial potential developed. I really would love to have more co-funding opportunities happen over the next couple of years. We've been doing this more, and even within MS societies from other countries that might not have a commercial funding vehicle mechanism for doing that, we've been working in that space as well, because all recognize now that you need to be in this space in order to be effective and have an impact. So we have existing relationships, as I mentioned, other MS societies, also across indications, so JDRF, and then hopefully to build some new relationships with other foundations. Also, this idea of cultivating the academic commercial collaborations. I want to put one example out there of how this can work. I would love to find more of these. So this is an example at NYU, which has a rather sophisticated drug discovery partnership program above their tech transfer office, identified through a society fellowship grant initially that led to a collaborative center award to further develop the technology and the IP, which ultimately led to a Fast Forward research grant through NYU to Jim Salzer's lab, which in a timely fashion, within months of the funding being announced, he released the announcement that their patent had issued, and their research was being published in Nature. So if I could have a couple more of those, that would be fantastic examples of how to kind of do start to finish from academic to commercial opportunity. And so the other thing for us to improve on is we essentially have created our own roadblock at this preclinical space. We have a lot of opportunities that are at a point where they need significant financing to get forward in the clinic, and that kind of presents a challenge. And so one of the things we want to do is looking at building some creative solutions to increase our capacity for funding those projects. And it's going to take, it's going to take some type of, I don't want to say consortium, but some sort of alignment through aligned organizations or groups to fund those. And so that's what Fast Forward is within the National MS Society. It's the commercial research program, and we use this unique, not unique, but rigorous project identification, review, and implementation process to enable drug and diagnostic development opportunities to move forward. So thank you. No questions.
Question?
Nope.
Can you speak a little bit about the sources and the problems that kind of drive the MS Society and how renewable they are?
Sure. So the society, I believe, raises over $200 million a year for all of its activities across the board: services, advocacy, research, the whole host of functions that the National MS Society provides. And that's through the whole suite of philanthropic efforts, be it bike rides, walks, individual giving, creative partnerships with the industry, everything we can to keep that. And, sustainability is always a challenge. I'm probably not the best one to answer that question, but I know that there are trends within the philanthropy fundraising that impact on some level. So, but I also know that the society is remarkably aware of those and responsive to changes. So it's really quite remarkable, the ability to capture the fundraising and keep it in a sustainable fashion. Yes. That's a great question, and we actually have more examples of that. For example, one of the statins has been shown to have efficacy in progressive MS, and there's really no commercial viability for someone to pay $100 million for the phase 3 to evaluate that. So, and that actually there are several examples of that, and so the society is looking at ways to through advocacy efforts and other approaches to find ways to finance that and make that more attractive and increase awareness and availability. There are a couple of companies that are kind of taking some approaches at that from the perspective of repurposed medicines. And one thing that I'm a proponent of is some of the changes that have been put in through the 21st Century Cures Act to increase market exclusivity and to really enable repurposed medicines to happen. I know there's been good intentions in that, but I think if you look at it from, say, a pharmaceutical company's perspective, the amount of exclusivity needed is still quite high in comparison. So I think that's one thing that could be done to enable more of these types of medicines to actually see the light of day.